Is this the new normal? Are VCs and tech people just like voting for Trump now? Vinod Khosla, he says, there are MAGA extremists in every corner of society. Now, for me, he's calling the all-in guys MAGA extremists.
He has been embroiled in this decades-long legal battle with California because he's trying to stop the public from accessing his beach. He lost an appeal to try to get California to drop their lawsuit against him.
Who wants poor people on their beach, right? As a billionaire, I do empathize somewhat. I don't want to have to deal with those emotions. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. I was just saying, this is going to be a banger episode. We've got a ton of ground to cover. So I want to get right into one of my favorites, which is the question of the Silicon Valley vibe shift. There's a slightly different spin on this. I want to focus specifically on the question of supporting Trump in Silicon Valley. And this has been a recent, over the last week, pretty, I don't want to say controversial, but fun conversation that has been triggered by the fact that David Sacks is about to host a fundraiser for Donald Trump. In fact, Trump is now in San Francisco as we recording Thursday. We're talking to you guys on Friday. So Trump's in town now, or he's I think about to be in town or something like that. Certainly the libs are getting ready for him. I just saw news of a giant Trump chicken, a chicken looking Donald Trump balloon that they're going to fight back against Trump in San Francisco for. It's a huge deal because Trump hasn't been to San Francisco in many years, because why would he be? Well, now he has a reason to be. This fundraiser is totally sold out. And there is a question going around of is this the new normal? Are VCs and tech people just voting for Trump now? Is it just David Sacks? What is going on? Dan Primick of Axios has been quick to say again and again and again, every time a new Trumper comes out, no, it's not a trend. Certainly the last one was I forget the dude from Sequoia who just came out this week and said he was a Trump guy. But Dan was like, no, he was always a Trump guy. Only after the last election where Trump did the insurrection, he vowed to never vote for Trump again, and now here we are, blah, blah, blah. Everything boils over, or I guess begins to boil over, on television, featuring, it was a CNBC show with a guest appearance by Vinod Khosla, who was pressed on this very question.
The first thing I would say is All In Podcast and some of the supporters there are not based in the Valley. I would say there's a bunch of MAGA extremists in every part of society, and I hope we can prevent them from destroying democracy, which is probably the most important issue we face.
Now, Vinod is one of the most storied investors in Silicon Valley, and still has quite a bit of respect, I would say. We can table that for a second. And he was asked, point blank, is this vibe shift real? What do you make? And then he says, the interviewer asked, what do you make specifically of Elon Musk and the All In Pod guys supporting Trump? And so Vinod says, first of all, these people are not from Silicon Valley. I guess he's referring in that point to their actual zip code. They were maybe a town over or something, not in the actual elite gated community that he is from or something. And then in the second place, he says, there are MAGA extremists in every corner of society. Now, for me, he's calling the all-in guys MAGA extremists. And this is part of a broader trend the New York Times is reporting today on the David Sacks fundraiser. Dedi Schleifer, who covers money, moved to the Times. And so now they're doing more stuff like this. They covered the fundraiser generally, but there was a piece on Ron Conway specifically that I thought was interesting, where Ron was actually taken aback by the support that Trump had in Silicon Valley and by this fundraiser of David Sacks's in particular. And he was actually calling and talking to friends of his and telling them not to go to it. So you have this strange thing where the old guard left seems to be surprised and also infuriated. And of course, their style, their tactic is not to it's not to debate it out. It's like, this is an unthinkable thing. You can just not support Trump. I'm going to try and, ice them out however I can. They're either extremists. You're a bad person if you're identified with them. I'm going to go behind the scenes and call people up and tell them not to go or whatever. But I guess I just don't know right away. Like, I don't really know what's going on here. I don't know if it's real or not. I don't know if it's broad or not. I have this giant question mark around it because how many of these people voted for Trump in 2020 and just didn't say anything? Is that a real significant shift in actual support, or is it a shift in discourse? How much of this is just the popularity of the All In podcast and Elon Musk on Twitter sort of making room for this? And you have a handful of people and it seems louder than it is. And then how much of this is real? How much of this is like just dollar for dollar a real trend? And I'm not sure. What do you guys make of it?
Well, on the Vinod thing specifically, I just want to say I think it's hilarious that he was saying that while sitting.
Say everything.
Well, he was sitting in his glass-walled mansion. I mean, for people who don't know the backstory of Vinod's connection to a specific piece of land in Silicon Valley,
the most infamous beach in Northern California. Basically, he bought this massive property in 2008. Off of Route 1, and it's got private beach. Well, it's got beach access that's not supposed to be private, but it's only accessible by one road. And he has been embroiled in this like decades-long legal battle with California because he's trying to stop the public from accessing his beach. And he recently just lost an appeal. I mean, this literally happened like 2 weeks ago. He lost an appeal to try to get California to drop their lawsuit against him. But it's just the irony of him sort of grandstanding about, extremists trying to, take over the political discourse or whatever, while he's sitting in his glass-walled mansion, trying to prevent uncouth poor people from getting onto his beach is a little bit rich. Well, it's not. So let's drill down on the details one more time on that beach thing. I feel a little bit, I don't feel bad actually, because this is like a diehard tax the rich billionaire who the beach is not public actually. The beach is not private. The beach is a public beach, right? If I have the case correct, it's like a piece of land that like the public takes to get to the beach is private, that he owns that, but the beach itself I believe is public, and that's what the battle is about.
Yeah, basically the beach is only accessible via this one road, and he controls access to the road. So he
shut it down. And now listen, yeah. Who wants poor people on their beach, right? Like as a billionaire, I do empathize somewhat with the plight of that. I mean, it's just got to be uncomfortable when you're sunning, at night or during the day, or you're taking your breakfast, like you said, in your like glass mansion, and you see someone who's making like $100,000 on your beach. It's like, I don't want to have to deal with those emotions. But if it's like, since that is the case, right? For me as well as a billionaire, I am not out there publicly talking about these like, let's tax the rich kind of pro-populist left policies. And I certainly wouldn't be telling people or shaming people for voting in a more right-wing manner. Like, I don't know another billionaire in Silicon Valley who has lived in a more sort of like classically presenting billionaire evil rich guy way as Vinod, which I respect. I think it's like punk rock as hell that he's like, you're not going on my beach. And it's like, one, not his beach, and two, like incredibly unpopular, and he doesn't give a shit. He's like very much like, nope, I'm going to take it to court. I'm going to fight every battle. I don't care. But it's just like the incongruence of that blows my mind. Like those, how do you have those two positions? Not only are you like the leftists on this stuff, but you're going to say like nobody else can have a contrarian opinion in this way. It's weird to me. Maybe it's like an old guy thing. Like he's very old too. Do you think he identifies with the sort of elderly nature of Biden? Is that maybe what's happening here?
I think he identifies with the robber barons of Long Island in 1922, who also blocked access to the beach to the public, and took Robert Moses to like basically take them to court and open up all of Long Island for the public. It's hilarious. History repeating.
Again, though, like it's weird. Don't you think it's weird that he is so, on one hand, aggressively living that He like seems to be about that life, but then he like attacks it in public. It's strange in this way.
It's not. This is like, for me, watching that clip is depressing. If he's talking about if he's actually calling the all-in guys MAGA, which is obviously untrue.
He's walked it back on Twitter, by the way. He says that he was not calling them extremists. He was just talking about the fact that they're not from Silicon Valley, which is like another classist, insane thing.
You're not like he. Okay, so David Sacks has Craft Ventures and it's in San Francisco. If that's not, I mean, I know that's not literally Silicon Valley down to the zip code, but it is Silicon Valley. Sorry.
Well, of course it is. I mean, what is Silicon Valley? It's an abstract concept, basically. It means tech industry. It means investors, tech. Like, that's what we're talking about when we say Silicon Valley. No one is actually like, Vinod, what do the 5 billionaires who live on Sand Hill Road, specifically only Sand Hill Road, have to say about Trump? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about tech money. Where is it going? Which he knows. He's just being, I think it's a sort of like, it's like what are those country club kind of vibes? It's like, he can't go here. He doesn't make enough money. Meanwhile, it's like he's talking about another billionaire. Like, I don't understand. It's some sort of weird intra-billionaire fighting over, I guess, where they live. I don't get it. I don't think that Silicon Valley is actually that nice. But another conversation for another day.
I feel like I feel like this is an attempt at a punishment for the gala or the fundraiser that Sacks is holding. Like, I think like they're trying to circle the wagons around him, or whatever the opposite of that is. And I feel like the response is kind of weak. But that's how I see this playing out in the media.
I wonder how much of it's even about Trump, and it's just about Sacks. Sacks is really popular right now. The All In podcast is the show in tech that everybody's listening to. The politics are way off what you would expect out of Silicon Valley. It's a massive, massive show that's bigger than tech. It's like as broader, even cultural relevance, I would say. And these venture capitalists, people like Vinod specifically, I mean, they're on Twitter a lot, sort of like, why are people looking at me that way? And I wonder if it's that rather than the Trump stuff.
Yeah, it could also just be virtue signaling. Like, it's a lot easier to say like, oh, I'm against or I'm pro taxing the rich than it is to actually like be for your interests. And like, it just seems like virtue signaling of like, oh, I want to be taxed, and like just giving off the appearance that you care about that when you really don't. Like,
and maybe you have to do that if you get, again, no, I don't. I love to go back to the beach. If you are like a sort of no poor people on my beach kind of guy, and it's on my beach kind of guy, you maybe have to do this kind of stuff. It's like, this is maybe what rich people have always done. This is sort of, it reminds me of the Epstein stuff a little bit and the Me Too movement, how it was like so many of the guys who were the absolute loudest, they came out of nowhere, like wearing the pussy hat, like self-flagellating, we're bad, we're so bad. And it's like, then you find out they had a sex scandal or something. And the people, it's like he doth protest too much kind of energy. They feel like they have to hide it in some way. I don't know. Meanwhile, Reid Hoffman, or first, any last thoughts on the Trump? I guess do we have just a question? Are we leaving with a question mark here? Do we not know how significant this is? This stuff, by the way, that we're doing some writing on and a little research into. We'll have more answers on this question. But I don't know, before we kind of, finish it off, any final thoughts here?
I'm kind of skeptical personally, just from talking to some people in San Francisco. I feel like Trump is still a pretty hard line for a lot of SF people. But what I've been hearing from moderates in San Francisco is a lot of them, are supporting moderate candidates. They're even willing to support, ex-Republicans who sort of loudly renounce their Republican Party affiliation. And criticize progressives, but Trump is still like a red line for them. And that's almost like a strategy for them to get support from disenchanted progressives, is basically, signal loud anti-Trump sentiment, so that you're sort of seen as still within the acceptable fray, and then slowly, try to get people aligned with your moderate local politics.
Yep. That is certainly the case and I kind of know the group you're talking about in SF local politics and that whole scene. And then I would say there's still just this it's a slightly broader, I think it's a very interesting question of how real Twitter is right now. And I think that's where we're reading a lot of our our trends out of. And I don't think it's very indicative of what's happening generally. I think it's indicative of like what's happening among a handful of people who are still on Twitter. And also like people who were never on Twitter a few years ago and now are on Twitter. It's a very different platform than it was a handful of years ago. So it's hard to tell, but there is an answer to it. It will just come down to the amount of dollars that are being donated, to Biden or Trump out of Silicon Valley. And by that, I mean both the region and the industry generally. We'll have hard numbers on that. My sense probably is that among tech workers, there will be no change. And among tech elite, sort of like the really high profile investors, the CEOs, this kind of like the billionaires, the millionaires, the multimillionaires, let's say, not these single digit millionaires, please. I think you're going to see a moderate shift away. And that'll have really probably about as much to do with Trump as it does to do with Biden, so Reid Hoffman, who is at this point the number one guy on the DNC side when it comes to Democratic fundraising. There's another Silicon Valley guy, if people are, I don't know if we have many non-tech listeners, but Reid Hoffman's a famous VC, PayPal Mafia, is a Democrat, hardcore, and has made that a big part of his identity, especially over the last, I would say 4 or 5 years. Trump derangement has been a very sort of ongoing thing with him. He went from sort of a let's talk to everybody guy to I can't talk to everybody guy. And he's putting his money where his mouth is. So he announces today that he's supporting Biden, as if nobody knew that, considering he's the number one DNC donor at this point. And he's like, this is the right man for the job. And I thought it was interesting that this happened. Okay, he publishes this note to Twitter, or to X rather, right as a story was going viral about Biden, which had to do with he went to a sort of D-Day commemoration in France, which was beautiful. The French really gave us our due. As they kind of always do, I will say, they don't get enough credit for being really thankful for this. Anyway, separate conversation. But Biden's over there talking to the president, making some comments, and there's a moment where it looks like he squats and maybe shit himself again. And so Reid's making this statement right as we're having another, did the president of the United States just shit his pants again controversy, and it gives me pause.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin III, Secretary of Defense of the United States of America.
I remember people were making this argument back when Dianne Feinstein was still in office and very clearly really old. They would say oh, well, so what? Her aides will just do things for them. And it's no, her aides weren't elected. Her aides weren't in the public spotlight. They were never having to answer for their policies on the debate stage or anything like that. So it's this idea that we're just going to let these people behind the scenes run everything is kind of insane to me too. So I don't know, but did he shit himself? Who knows?
Well, it's not just rumors. It's almost borderline gossip. You're hearing word from people around him that the man wears diapers and stuff, which I don't know. Yeah, you're right. We don't know for sure, but I think, and there's obviously a reason that people would want to say this. I understand how embarrassing it is, but it's weird how believable it is. And like you said, it does affect the elderly. And this is an elderly man who doesn't know where he is. And I guess the best case scenario, so did he poop himself? I don't know. What's obviously happening here is we're talking about how old he is. And it's strange because Trump is also old. This is an old guy. But Trump, speaking of someone who should be shitting his pants, have you seen what that man eats at McDonald's? The picture is going viral of his average dinner. And it's I think it was 2 Quarter Pounders, or no, it was 2 Big Macs, 2 fish fillets. There was one other thing, and then a strawberry milkshake, and that's his standard order. That's a regular for Donald Trump. He doesn't. One of our colleagues was saying he doesn't jerk off. We know he doesn't drink, and this is what he eats. It's just like a strange, like beast mode kind of energy that I've never personally encountered before. Certainly not in politics, and it feels, separate from. It's crazy to eat that way, and I don't recommend it. This is like not an official Pirate Wire's endorsement of that diet. Like, holy shit, I don't know how he's still alive, but he seems like unstoppable, and the contrast is pretty wild to see, I think.
Yeah, what's interesting is didn't the Super Size Me guy, the guy who did that documentary, just passed away from, I think it might have been cancer or something, so maybe that's not connected, but it is still like, that's not a healthy diet for you. But I guess like everybody has their vices, and for his vice to be like the literal symbol of American imperialism is kind of funny.
The golden arches.
Yeah.
I think just the question of whether or not Biden did in fact shit his pants is, I feel like it doesn't matter. Like, Biden could have proved that he was not senile at this point, and he has not yet. And that's why every other media cycle is like, did he do this senile thing? Did he fall asleep? Whatever it is. And so Trump has proven that he's not senile yet, I think. Right? Nobody's
definitely,
asking
because he's doing long form talks, and we see him communicating. We see him on the campaign trail. Biden is not. And I mean, let's go back to the first. So you have three instances where this rumor begins. The very first one that we talked about today, the one that happened today, is Thursday we're filming, so it'll be yesterday when this thing airs, when you look at the video, maybe he didn't shit himself, but he is confused about the question of whether or not there's a chair behind him, and he's there for a while, and his wife looks alarmed. I think my read of the French president was he seemed confused and was trying not to focus on it. That's a man who's not all there. And like you said, he had a long time to prove, plenty of time at this point to prove that he's not senile. He didn't because he can't. We're going to see the craziest debate, I think, ever if they actually allow this man on stage, which I don't think that they should. And I think that we're not alone here. So I was looking at the Polymarket, the sort of betting markets, and there's a ton of interesting shit here. This is like people putting money down on different, it's like almost like a better form of polling, I would say. So you have people who have actual skin in the game. If I get this answer wrong, I'm going to lose money. So we have predictions for the presidential race, standard type stuff like that. Is Trump going to be in jail before Election Day? The one that caught my eye today was, will Biden drop out of the presidential race? There's a 24% chance, according to the betting markets. That's people putting money down on a belief that this is going to happen. And why would they not? Every other day I see someone asking him, from the Democrats, asking him to do this, which is why when you're going to the question of who's the most likely winner of the 2024 presidential race, it's not just Biden and Trump up there. You have a couple of others. Donald Trump, 55% chance. Joe Biden, 36% chance. Michelle Obama with a 5% chance. Robert Kennedy, 2. Kamala, 2. Like, how does that happen? And then Gavin Newsom, 2. So those are what's really the story here is you've got Michelle, Kamala, and Gavin is the question for a lot of people. They're like, there's an edge case here where one of those 3 people hops in at the last second. Kamala feels to me like that only happens if, I guess, Biden dies, like right of old age before the election. But Newsom and Michelle, that is like a last minute swap. And Michelle's crazy to me. I don't understand why people keep asking for this on the left. You have people be like, she could win. I mean, I guess maybe she could because she's popular. Newsom makes the most sense. Newsom is what should have happened for the Democrats like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, or whatever it was, when they were doing when you had the primaries. And I think Newsom would have a real chance of winning against Trump. My sense is he would actually beat Trump, which just sounds crazy because California is a shithole. But he's young. He's very good in a debate. He's very good. He's very charismatic. He's very good at making his case. Like, this is a man who can sit down and tell you that San Francisco is actually in a great place. And you're like, oh, maybe. He's got a little bit of a bimbo vibe, but that's never hurt anybody in America. I mean, Sarah Palin went very far. So I think it could have happened, and I think it still might happen. What do you guys make of that, of the betting market situation here, and like the question of whether or not one of these people actually does become if not the president, the nominee, like might be running against Trump, like let's say a couple months before the election.
The Michelle Obama thing is interesting to me because the argument that people always made like against someone like Gavin Newsom is like, okay, Biden drops out. How are you going to get past the argument of not appointing his black female VP who's right beneath him? Michelle Obama is the one that just kind of like, I guess, like defeats that argument because you're like, okay, here's another black woman. So it would make it a little bit more palatable in people's minds. But yeah. Makes sense why Kamala's so
that's
low.
crazy. I think they're not that. So I do think that Michelle Obama will be better than Kamala, which is funny because Michelle has zero relevant experience and Kamala was supposed to have been a senator. I don't know how the fuck that happened. But she like had power and now she's the VP. But that's a woman who just like I would not trust with like a regular, like a toll collector's job. I don't understand how that happens to politics. Like, I don't know. She, for me, and it is really she's a very strong argument against democracy, just conceptually. But Michelle, who is very popular, I think is very smart. She could have gone the Hillary route and been a senator and really made a case, tried to become the president. I think she would have had a good shot actually, but she didn't. She didn't choose that. I would see it. I think it would be really hard to get her to say yes to this. It would require a lot of pressure from the DNC, and it's like they would have to be really convinced that she's going to win to do all of that. When meanwhile, Gavin's sitting right there, and he wants it. He's made everything that he does in California at this point. In sort of moderating the hard left on the California DNC. I think all of that is him gearing up for a run, and this could really be his moment.
Yeah, I agree. I've never understood why. I mean, I would be curious to know how much of Biden clinging to this nomination is actually coming from his personal narcissism, because I know he's said repeatedly throughout interviews that he never considered not running for a second term, despite the fact that like he's got all these very obvious physical and mental ailments. And also I would say like the difference between an 80-year-old and an 84-year-old is just, in terms of mental acuity, like, exponentially worse on the latter half of that age spectrum. So he's only going downhill. But I do think Gavin did really well in his debate with Ron DeSantis. Like he was very adept at fending off Ron DeSantis's attempts to troll him.
Yes.
And he has the kind of, at the end of the day, like, since so much of this race is not actually about specific policy and more about people's gut reactions to a specific candidate's demeanor, I think Gavin has a pretty good, I think he would be able to potentially, go head to head with Trump in terms of trolling each other. So it's kind of, it is weird to me. The narrative
Trolling, I don't know.
What's that?
I don't know that he'd be a good troll, but he'd be a good foil. He's the opposite of Trump in many ways, and in ways that Trump would find really difficult to fight with. Like Gavin is young and he's handsome, and he is not buffoonish in the way, like there's not really an easy way to attack him other than his record. And Gavin's done a pretty good job in debates. Like when he's pressed on it, he's done a good job of defending his record, I think. Even though I don't think it's actually defensible. He's a very charming guy.
Yeah, I guess by trolling, I just mean like smiling when Trump sort of goes off at him and sort of like, rhetorically fending off Trump's jabs. But I do think there's a little bit of a question mark for me with, on one hand, Biden is clearly senile. And then on the other hand, we're supposed to think that he's mounted this like very formidable case against aides and DNC advisors to like maintain his ironclad grip on the nomination. I don't know. Maybe it is. I guess he's the president of the United States, and probably controls a lot of the donor networks. But it's kind of weird to me.
So I would be interested in a Polymarket. Is there one, Mike? You looked maybe today, but on if he wins, whether or not he dies in his second term? Because I think that there's got to be like a medical team.
No,
that's
I've not seen that on Polymarket.
He's not going to die before. They're like checking his monitors. So like we're pretty sure, like 90% chance he won't die before the election, right? But like what happens afterwards? He's like clearly
that's how you get Kamala now. Which
yeah, that's why the VP pick, presumably it's Kamala again. Do they change VPs? Does an incumbent president ever change VPs between the first and second?
That has happened. I believe that happened. Well, that had to happen. I think back when didn't one of them was it? Who was the one that like went to jail or was about to go to jail and had to be pardoned by Ford, and then Ford became the VP?
Nixon? I don't remember. I mean, my point is to say that like I feel like there's a 50% chance we have Kamala is like president at one point or another if Biden wins.
Well, that's going to be a part of the election. They're going to be campaigning on that. Her problem is like,
nobody
it's funny
likes her.
that
like, does anybody what's public opinion of Kamala?
No one likes her. How could you like her? She's not a likable person. And it's, I think the bigger problem there is just the obvious stupidity where Biden, he was kind of going out. He was certainly going out in the last election. You could feel he seemed a little bit senile to me already, but he was not stupid. Not like a sort of technically, like classically presenting idiot. Trump, whatever you want to say about him, you might absolutely hate him. That's a very intelligent man who's able to, he's very charming. He's very funny. He's very witty. Like he knows how to win. I think that's intelligence. Like most people that we see to get to that level of politics, you think there has to be a level of intelligence. Not necessarily good people. I don't think it really incentivizes for that. They're all, I think, probably slightly evil, but smart. And she's not that. And she's like sort of clownish. And I think she almost could only have happened after Trump. So Trump happens and it's like you have this reality star guy running and winning. And it's like, well, we've done that. Like, there's nothing we can't do. Bring in Kamala, who's the dumbest person in politics, but I guess we don't have to get into why she was elected or why she was selected. But I think they have, and they could swap out the VP. But why, if you're going to go through all of that, why not just swap him out? Can he be pressured? I don't actually know how this works. Can the DNC just be like, you got to go?
I don't know. Isn't it too late though? Like Newsom needs to have been campaigning to be swapped out at this point.
It's going to be this summer, or this is the summer at the DNC convention is when this might happen.
Yeah, I totally get Sanji's argument though about just like his narcissism. Like every time he's asked about his age, he always like challenges reporters to like push-up contests and stuff. Like he's just he's very just in denial about his age. Like it would take a lot of pressuring, I think.
Yes, he's like that guy who refuses to stop driving at age 80, whatever. And it's like, Grandpa, you're going to kill someone. And now, though, the difference is he has the nuclear codes. And no one's comfortable with it. The Democrats are not comfortable with this, which is why it's like it's so obviously clear to everybody that when someone says, I am proud of Biden, they're lying. It's like they just don't want Trump to win, which is obviously fine. You're just a party guy. I actually think that's perfectly legitimate in a democratic system, like to just always vote your party, whatever. But it's certainly not him. So we'll see. There was another, I think, interesting. I just got pretty excited about the markets. There was one more that I thought was pretty cool. The obvious one, but I guess I wonder what you guys think. Who's Trump's VP choice going to be? And I have a handful here, but before I give you the what the betting markets are ranking, who do you guys think? Who is each of your person?
Nikki Haley, probably.
Nikki Haley.
I think he's already said. Yeah, he's already said he won't pick her. I'm pretty sure.
I thought he said he was open to it.
I think in his administration, but I think he was very strongly anti her being VP.
Oh, maybe I'm mistaking the news that she pledged fealty to him not too long ago or something like that.
One person I've seen on the rise is Doug Burgum, which makes sense because he's really rich and could contribute a lot of money to helping Trump win, which kind of makes sense. I've seen JD Vance is also up there. Elise Stefanik. I guess who I think is highest in the markets right now, I'd guess maybe Doug Burgum because I've seen him on the rise.
Sanjana?
I have given it Absolutely no thought, actually. I mean, JD
right.
Vance makes sense, I guess. I think he'd probably opt for someone younger, someone who's got, I could see him maybe wanting someone with ties to tech for his VP.
So here's something, I'm going to break it down for you. And this really surprised me. And now I'm thinking more about it and I have a few thoughts. 25% chance. So by far the top guy here, Tim Scott.
Really?
And it's like, I think it's got to be, so this is on Polymarket, 25% chance Tim Scott, 70% chance just other guy, so another male candidate, and so that doesn't really count. It's like 1 million in there. The next highest guy on here is Marco Rubio at 11%. Then you've got JD Vance right below him at 10. You got Sarah Huckabee, which I think is interesting, at 9% because she is a bulldog. I used to watch her press conferences, like, holy shit, the way she would just dismantle these reporters. And Trump likes that in a person. So maybe that. Ben Carson at 6%, Stefanik 5%, Vivek 4%, Robert Kennedy somehow on this poll as well, 4%, who knows? Haley at 4%, and then a handful of others. Trump family member at less than 1%, but someone's like, maybe throw up Ivanka. I think Tim Scott is interesting. It's like, maybe what people are picking up on here is, for the first time in really any of our lives, the American black vote is, I wouldn't say it's up for grabs, but it's putting the Democrats in a very dangerous position where if it's not like a smash, overwhelming, we took it all, you have a lot of states that are suddenly a question mark. And Trump is making a lot of inroads among black men specifically. This is a trend we've seen for many years. And this year seems to be by far the best year for him on this front. And the selection of perhaps like a black candidate would seem to be some kind of strategy to help. But I don't think Tim Scott's going to help. I don't think Tim Scott is a guy that is many people in general, let alone like black Americans, other than the color of his skin, I don't see them really relating to him. I don't know that he's going to do it for that reason. And if he's not doing it for that reason, I don't know why he would do it, because I don't think Tim's very good in a debate. He's not rich. I think, Riley, your idea of him needing someone rich is interesting to me as well. He's not bankrolling his own race. He does care a lot about money. I think we saw this when the TikTok stuff happened, where he was very influenceable. He was like, I just need cash. And I think that could be the era we're in. But yeah, I have no idea. I really don't. I guess if I had a pick, I would say JD, just because he seems like the smartest one up there and the best one up there. But after him, maybe Sarah, because she's so good in a debate. I don't know.
Another thing about needing money is like all the lawsuits, like it's kind of drained him of a lot of resources. So like just adds to the need of needing money for the campaign trail. And then the person of color thing is interesting because a lot of people were making the argument of, he needs a woman on his ticket in order to make sure he doesn't lose the female vote. But with the strides he's making in the person of color like category, it maybe would sort of like cancel out any losses he would gain more male people of color to sort of cancel out any losses he makes in the female vote is the thinking there. So I couldn't see that.
I don't really understand the idea that, I mean, I'm not convinced that women are more likely to vote for Trump if he has a female running mate. I don't know. I'm just not convinced, right? He already won without it. And I do think that Sarah, separate from that, is just like she's a good person to have as a surrogate on the campaign trail. But maybe you don't need, like, if you just promise her something crazy in the cabinet, maybe that's enough. I mean, she's a governor now, though. I don't know that's a woman. I think she wants to be president. So I don't know if a position in the cabinet would even be better for her than being the governor of a state, but I don't know. Interesting. We'll see. So it is another Trump one. Sorry, a little heavy this week, but it's really not about Trump. It's about, let's say, our institutions and the question of education. Trump appears on, I believe it was Fox and Friends about a week ago now, and he says, among many things, he is going to abolish the Department of Education.
You mentioned the kids. So we're going to cut the Department of Education, let it be run locally. We have this
end
mess.
the Department of Education?
End
Federal Department
it,
of
other
Education?
than to have a little tiny coordination. You know, it would be nice to make sure that everybody's teaching English.
Yeah.
Let them learn English, okay?
I love this.
But no, we're cutting the Department of Education. I was ready to do it before. And then, again, the COVID really, if we didn't throw money at that, you would have had a depression. We would have been in a depression.
I love music to my ear. I've hated this thing for a long time. I've been pilled on the abolish the Department of Education, topic for maybe like 15 or 20 years. It was as soon as I learned that it actually it was established in 1980. So this is not something, so people obviously lost their minds on Twitter when this clip went viral. There's an idea of like, oh my God, how could we possibly exist in this country? He's basically just getting rid of public school, right? Like, how do you ever even have public school if you don't have the Department of Education telling people what to do? Meanwhile, like I was saying before, the department was created in 1980. Today, it has 4,400 employees, about $68 billion a year. And there's a question to me of what the fuck do they actually do? I don't see any evidence whatsoever that they've benefited the average student. And I think that we have a lot of problems like this in the government, just whole departments where no work that is meaningful is actually done and tons of money is spent just to spend it. That bothers me, not because I want the money not to be spent, but because I want the schools to be better. Brandon, you looked into just what they actually do. I would love to know, what does this department do with $68 billion a year?
Yeah, so this 2024 is actually 80 billion. They requested 90 billion, but it is $500 million less than 2023 by the numbers that I've seen. A lot of it, 30 billion is going to just Pell Grants and like federal student aid, so like student loans. So that's nearly, like you're nearing close to half there. And then there's about 40 or 30 billion that goes to like special education programs and supporting schools with like low income schools and like disadvantaged kids. And then the rest goes to like research, basically like 700 million or so goes to research and teacher education. So that's basically how it breaks down. I would mention that Fox and Friends clip, like that segment that you pulled out or that we saw on Twitter, that was in the context of like, they were asking him, what is he going to do to address the federal deficit, which is crazy high right now. And he's like, look, we're going to cut the Department of Education, the Department of the Interior, which manages natural resources. And the Department of Education takes up about 1% of the entire national budget. So he's not, like, I'm not totally sure, like if he's targeting the right area here for cuts. But yeah, that's basically how the numbers break down.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to solve the deficit.
I don't think it is either.
I mean,
it's
like
the biggest
nothing. It's like pissing in the ocean. But I don't want the Department of Education to exist. And if you're telling me that it's just charity for poor kids, then don't call it the Department of Education. Just call it the Department of Charity. In fact, all of our charity programs should be in a department where it's like the Department of fucking handouts. So when we talk about these things, we can talk about them honestly. That's what you're really saying. You're saying the average student, really 90+% of them are never going to see any of this money that we're spending every year to just pump into the abyss. Also, no one needs to go to college. Like, most people do not need to be going to college, and that is our high-level problem. Some of this stuff I also saw was student loans. They manage, I believe, the student loan debt, and it's that shouldn't even be a thing, okay? The government should not be in the business of loans whatsoever, let alone student loans, which we now know are bad for people, okay? These are lifelong crippling debt is what we're talking about. And the reason is because these kids take on an unlimited amount of debt because we believe that everybody has some kind of God-given right to take on debt to go to school. Because that exists, because any poor person who has no hope at all of paying this back, they can't declare bankruptcy. They can take on any amount that they want. The schools raise their cost of tuition, and it just has ballooned and ballooned and ballooned. That entire system needs to go, and probably that begins with just having an honest conversation about like, what does the average person get out of college? Okay, like not much. Most people don't need to go to college at all. If you want to be really any tradesman, you don't need to go to college. If you want to be, I was an editorial assistant at Penguin. I didn't have to go to college. It's crazy that they expect a college degree for that job. You learn it on the job. I don't think you need to go to college to be a reporter or a writer. I think you need to be writing. I think that we really have, by incorporating college into this sort of like American dream, we've really played ourselves. And I feel like abolishing the Department of Education will be a nice symbolic gesture that would be like sort of indicating we're going to try something new. I think college is good for people who are really smart and do really well in high school. There should be a handful of just like the best schools in the world for sure. Obviously important for things like medicine when you need to go and just learn a lot of shit. I think law makes sense. A lot of these advanced degrees do make sense, but no, the average person doesn't need to go. And I think saying that is crazy. Like they should just be using that money to start a business or to buy a house.
Yeah, there's actually a bill. I was looking into it and I saw that Thomas Massey, the libertarian congressman, had introduced a bill last year to abolish the Department of Education. And basically his proposal is to reallocate the funding that goes to Pell Grants and some other forms of financial aid that they offer to the Department of the Treasury and just shut down the rest of the Department of Education and give states kind of complete jurisdiction over establishing their educational guidance. So, it's not something that hasn't been discussed in Congress before. His bill, I don't think, went anywhere though. So,
Sanjana, what do you make of the college question generally, as someone who is probably our most learned staff member?
I think that I agree that most people should think very carefully before going. I think it's true that colleges sell themselves as, especially elite colleges, sell themselves as the ticket to like a well-paying job immediately upon graduation. I'm not entirely sure that's the case anymore, or if it ever was really the case. I know a lot of people who graduated from Stanford who are still looking for jobs, for example, which is normal for lots of graduates. But I think I guess I would say the benefit, I think, of going to an elite school remains the fact that you meet people who can connect you to other people. It's basically like there's a networking effect that happens that I do think is important. And I think it is annoying sometimes to see lots of people who themselves went to elite schools and have benefited enormously from it and are sending their kids to elite schools say, we don't need to go to, like, no one needs to be going to college at all. But that being said, I do think that, there's people should weigh the costs, because it's not only just the monetary cost, it's 4 years of your life that you could be doing, potentially more interesting things depending on your skill set and what you want to get involved with. There's lots of Teal fellows who start businesses rather than going to college, and they end up doing really, really well. And I think there's a danger with it as well, where it kind of, like, I'm thinking about this article that came out in the New York Times a few weeks ago about how like a plurality of Harvard students are now trying to get jobs at McKinsey and, these other consulting firms immediately after their second year of college. And that is the indicator of success for them, is getting into one of these consulting jobs. And basically they're just consigning themselves, these are really smart kids, presumably, who are consigning themselves to potentially a soulless career in kind of like middle management. They're going to make a lot of money, but yeah, I guess all of that's to say that I think it can kind of narrow your view of what constitutes a good career, even though there are some benefits. But that's just for the
I
elite
think it
schools.
also, I think that's true. No matter what college you go to, it doesn't, the elite one, I agree, the McKinsey thing is very interesting and the consulting thing is very interesting. And I think it's sort of a trap in a lot of ways. But just the idea that you go to college and it gets you somewhere, I think that illusion is really damaging to young, bright people. That it's not that lie, really, that is being told by the government and the colleges. It's just not true. There's no ladder to success. And things become very difficult if you don't have a perspective on what you want to do with your life, regardless of where do you go to school. I do think it's worth going to the top schools for sure. I think if you get into Stanford, you go to Stanford. I think that if you get into even Harvard, despite the clownery, I think it's probably still worth going to Harvard. I think that you get into like only like a tier 3 or 4 school. I don't know what the value is for some of these really, really bloated degrees. I think you get into NYU, it's like, you probably shouldn't go unless you're just super wealthy and your parents are like, fuck it, go party for 4 years. It doesn't really matter. But did you see that clip? Actually, I can't believe we didn't talk about this. It went super viral of those women. The women with their degrees. Matt, play that clip.
Hi, I'm Melanie. I'm studying the unseen body and creative spaces, erasure and exposure of the queer. Yeah!
Hey, I'm Nina, and I studied the arts, education, and social justice.
Yeah!
I'm Joyce. I studied decolonial intimacies, indigenous politics of resistance.
Yeah!
I'm Victoria, and I studied remembering or forgetting, navigating international conflict through collective memory.
Yeah!
I'm Naomi, and I'm studying Black political economy.
Yeah!
I'm Natalie, and I'm studying fashion history and gender studies.
Yeah!
That's crazy. Like those, I can't believe that they said that out loud, first of all. I can't believe they posted it on the internet. I can't believe, here's what I really can't believe. I can't believe that I'm going to be paying for it because all of these women are exactly the women who are going to say the government should be taking care of my student loan debt.
I have a slightly different take on that, which is that I actually think those women, like some of them are going to do very well for themselves because they're going to get into HR bureaucracies and, they're going to become the commissars who run these nonprofits and who run these, DEI, sort of consulting branches at firms. And I think some of them are not going to find that kind of work. But I do think that this is one of the issues with so many people going to college is you get this massive overproduction of people who may not have skills that warrant good paying jobs necessarily, but who feel entitled to them. And so then there's this problem of people have talked about this a lot, this overproduction of elites, but they're not necessarily elites in the sense that they have, elite knowledge or skill sets. They're just elites in the fact that they're credentialed in a way that reads elite to us. So, yeah. I
have no doubt. I agree with you. I think that they're going to be influential. I think that clip sort of demonstrates what has gone on in America over the last 15 years that has led us to our current position. But I also don't think that they're going to pay their student loan debts. I think that we're going to end up doing that. I think it's going to be both. I think they're going to have positions of power, but they're not paying that debt back. Did you guys see that? Brandon or Riley, did you guys see that clip by any chance? Do you have any reactions to it before we move on?
10 years ago, we were making fun of safe spaces on college campuses, but then, they became the HR departments at the biggest companies in America. And it's it's not a joking thing anymore. It became a lot more sinister. So yeah, it's not really something to joke about.
Well, the colonialism is such a popular word for when you're making up your major. It's how do we dismantle the colony and internalize colonialism and all of this shit. And there's a very clear perspective that the goal is it is anti-Western and it is decolonialism. And that is frightening to me that people are, when you just parse that, if you sort of pull it apart and ask yourself, what does this mean? What are we really talking about here? What does it mean to decolonize North America? Where do the people go? What takes its place? I was watching this show, the last season of True Detective, where it's weirdly it's not good, and like not even as a mystery, it's not good, and that it's very woke about Eskimos. It's like there's like a woke Eskimo thing happening where it's like, this is our Iceland and all of this kind of stuff. The idea, and they're like, we were here first, and there's this very sort of like, you're oppressing us by being here thing. What they want, they just want America gone. And I think that while interesting, I guess, maybe to talk about at a coffee shop, that is fundamentally a violent, terrifying worldview that should be totally forbidden in polite conversation. I don't know why you're allowed to talk like sort of in a friendly way about the project of moving 300 million Americans out of America and giving it to a bunch of people who may or may not be Native American. Let's be honest about most Native Americans that I see today. Native Americans, they're looking very white to me. Okay, I know a lot of white people who are claiming Cherokee heritage, and I'm not about to give them New Jersey. It's weird. Brandon, last thoughts here.
I have a hard time taking them seriously. I don't know that they actually believe what they say. It seems like a fun thing to talk about when you're a college kid, frankly. I think my idea of I think college does have value, but it's like if I'm not talking about the elite schools right now, but the value is not necessarily education; it's just social. So I think the problem is kind of like how we frame it. I would be totally okay with college if it was framed like, look, we're not going to fund you. The taxpayer's not going to fund you, but what will happen when you go to college, if you live in another state, like if you're living in the dorms, you'll meet a lot of people. You'll have access to sex, basically, right? Like there will be a lot of partying that you can do, and you'll have lifelong friends after that, and it'll be a very unique and specific experience that it's not going to really set you up for your future from a career perspective. But there is like there's a lot of value in, I think, being involved, like leaving your hometown, being alone, right? Like you have to go to this dorm or this college town, and you don't know anybody, and you're forced to meet a lot of people and like sort of make a community with like your fellow classmates. And I think that is cool. But I don't know that I don't know that you need to do that to have a high paying job. I mean, you definitely don't have to do that, right? It's just a different thing.
While I was watching that video, you can't help but wonder who these women were taught by, right? Like, who is their professor? And one such likely candidate at Boston University would have been Kendi. Sanjana, why don't you take me? Kendi has had quite the fall from grace. There was recently, I believe, a New York Times profile that we can talk about. Why don't you just break down what's going on with our good friend, the sort of president of anti-racism?
Yeah, I mean, you guys will probably remember him from 2020, which was the last time I think he was really prominent, maybe 2021, prominent in the national consciousness and discourse. But he pioneered anti-racist theory, or he sort of brought it into the mainstream around the time of Black Lives Matter and the uprising, or whatever you want to call it, in 2020. He basically, so he's a professor. I think his specific area of study, he's an anti-racist activist. I think he's a professor of African American studies. But he basically, around the time of 2020, I think it was in June, he joined Boston University, and began this Center for Anti-Racist Studies. And he also got an endowed chair that previously belonged to, what's his name? Elie Wiesel. I actually don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh yeah, the author of Night. He was I went to Boston University. He was a huge deal there. He's the celebrity at BU.
Yeah, Elie Wiesel, I think it is. But he's, author of Night, very famous Holocaust survivor and author. And Kendi got his endowed chair. And this center amassed an enormous amount of funding in like a year and a half. Jack Dorsey donated $10 million.
Jack.
Yeah, I remember that.
Not Jack. Not like this. Not like this.
Tons of people donated money. And around the same time, Kendi came out with this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which became a New York Times bestseller for weeks. It actually sold out on Amazon around the time it came out. He went like on speaking tours with Robin DiAngelo. He who authored, what was the name of her book? It was the White Guilt book.
I forget that one, but it was always funny that it was written by a white woman.
Anti-racist baby? White fragility? Are you talking about Robin DiAngelo?
Yeah. What is it?
White fragility?
White fragility.
Yeah.
Yes. White fragility. I can't believe I forgot that. But Kendi and Robin DiAngelo sort of went on tours together. And he came out with a children's book, Anti-Racist Baby. He came out with, God, I had a list of all the stuff he came out with at the time. He had just tons of like a deck of cards, anti-racist playing cards. He really ascended. And ultimately, this center amassed almost $50 million in funding almost overnight. And a few months ago, a story came out where it was revealed that Kendi had laid off like over half of the employees at this center and that they were going to restructure it radically. And some of his, laid off former employees had spoken to the press and said, oh, he's this control freak who gets mad whenever you criticize him. And they talked about like really bad working conditions at the center. And so this had sort of sparked some gloating, I guess, from like the Chris Rufos of the world who were like, Kendi is a fraud, whatever. Anyway, so BU, his employer, and the, owner of the center does this audit to see if there's any financial mismanagement. And the audit finds that there isn't. Though I will say that like what this audit was looking at was really just, are the grants being properly accounted for? And, have you falsified information about how much money you're receiving or who it's going to, that kind of like stuff. It's not necessarily, people keep bringing up the fact that he's been like exculpated by this audit, but really it's just, it's just looking at
the audit was looking for crime, not for stupidity, right?
The audit was looking for crime. Yeah. So, this comes out a few months ago. And then this week, New York Times Magazine, different publication, comes out with this article called Ibram X. Kendi Faces a Reckoning of His Own. And it's this really, really long profile of him that is very, very glowing. I mean, it's almost hagiographical, I think. Where basically, the author of the piece says, Ibram Kendi, he's this very like introspective, withdrawn scholar who, his seminal idea basically is that you can separate policy into racist or anti-racist categories. He's been misunderstood by his critics, and, Ibram Kendi participates in this piece and says, we just got so much funding at once and then it dried up after the pandemic. And so now we're restructuring into these short fellowships rather than permanent jobs. But all of this kind of obscures the fact that like this center did have access, some of it was tied up in an endowment, but they had access to tens of millions of dollars for the past, 3.5 years. And they've produced almost no research. I mean, I was on their website a few hours ago, and they've got like a defunct sort of COVID tracking data panel. They came out, actually, this might be interesting for you, Solana. They have an anti-racism in tech project, and they've just published.
Sign me up.
Yeah, and they've just published a piece. Well, I don't know if it was just published, but it was published recently. The piece is called Racial Inequality in Organizations, a Systems Psychodynamic Perspective. This is one of like a handful of papers they've published, where the premise is we treat white men as the dominant group and black people as the archetypical subordinate group in society, in U.S. society. In our theory, work contexts that conflate merit with idealized images of white masculinity provoke unconscious distress in white men who inspire to meet these ideals. So it's this like sort of psychosocial analysis.
They're saying like it's bad for white people. Is this what they're trying to say? Like the iconography is bad for white men.
Yeah, I think that they're basically saying white men feel that their self-worth is threatened by Black people, I guess. And so one of the reasons they cling so strongly to their position in the hierarchy is because they're having this like, psychosocial fear reaction.
I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you feel, how do you feel? Riley and Brandon, you're both white men. I'm a white guy. I don't feel afraid, but I don't know. I'm half Spanish, so I'm technically Hispanic, and that might be the reason I don't feel afraid.
Sounds like it's like a show me the white man and I'll show you the psychosocial distress or whatever. It's totally made up. They like started with a hypothesis and then did the research to prove it.
Brandon,
I don't know. It seems incoherent.
You don't feel that you have an unconscious multi-level defense system comprising projective identification at the individual level?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't know, right?
It's unconscious.
Then I wouldn't have any idea. So it's hard to. I guess I need Kendi to tell me. I should probably read Anti-Racist Baby or whatever, and maybe I'll.
I think that if you really cared about this, you would quit and send me an application of a Black woman to replace you. This is fucking unbelievable. In 2024, you're still working. You still have a job in 2024. There are people in Africa who are starving. This is unreal. Riley, as a white man, respond.
That's how much millions of dollars went into this article. Sorry. That's insane.
Unclear.
That they spent so much and are crazy.
Yeah, I think to go back on the earlier point, which was like, Sanjana, you raised this, where obviously there's when you blow through $50 million, the natural question, and it's not, I don't think it's a full 50, right? Like how much did he totally blow through?
So he didn't actually, 30 million of that is tied up in an endowment that they can't access. It looks like they were able to access, from that 30 million, they were able to access like 1.2 million of that a year. And then they also had access to the remaining 20 million or so, but the university has been very cagey about, I guess there were like specific guidelines for projects they could use that money for. And the university hasn't disclosed what those guidelines are. They do mention them in the audit. So it was, probably at most $20 million, but certainly tens of millions of dollars were used, to fund
so I think
this work.
You see that, and your natural question is, what did Kendi, like what vacation home did Kendi buy with that money? But he's not a criminal, it's not like the BLM women who are actually using that money to fund a lavish lifestyle. It's like Kendi believes in this dumb shit that he says, and he's authentically not very bright, which is how he blew the money. And so you do this audit and you look at where did the money go? He's just bad at this. And that's what happens when you're bad with money and don't really know what you're doing. Money just evaporates. It's like, this is how, when people win the lottery, they almost always lose all the money because the average person who wins the lottery is not very bright. And there's a reason that they are poor. I guess some people have a different reason. Maybe it's like some people really have a reason to be poor beyond just their raw aptitude. But the average person who wins the lottery is like super not good with money and blows it all and is impoverished by the end of that process and sad, right? It's like very similar, I think, to the Kendi thing. He sort of won the lottery. He was doing this shit right at the moment that America lost its mind over the police stuff specific, but I think it was like the police stuff caged inside of COVID, right? It was this very unique moment in American history that hopefully we'll never see again. And he was there. It was like right person, right time. It was like, he, and that was that. He still has money I'm sure he's living a great life. I mean, he's got the book sales and all that stuff. Whatever happened to Robin though? That one was very suspicious to me. How does a white woman in 2020, how did she become the face of anti-racism? Very suspicious. I don't know how they allowed it to happen.
On her website right now, and it looks like she has a white affinity group course. It sounds like some white supremacist thing. A white affinity group course happening from this August to this October.
Wait, I got to stop and back up for a second. Are you telling me that she has a group running where you have to be white to enter?
It's loading.
I will lose my mind. I will go fucking bananas if this woman has a group that you can only enter if you're white.
Let's see. She is... God, this brochure is like so difficult to navigate. Yeah, I think it's only for white people. It's the ultimate goal, raising white consciousness and equipping white people to engage in anti-racist action. You will learn the foundational framework for understanding racism, group dynamics, how to move from passivity and self-focus to accountability and action. It seems completely, and it's based on a book on strategies for leading white people in anti-racist practice. So I don't see anyone other than a white person signing up for this.
Basically.
Damn. It's like, congratulations on the novel new reinvention of literal racism, Robin. I feel like she's way more insidious than Kendi, who again, I feel like is not very bright and very earnest. I think that that's a woman who I don't trust, but she's gone now. We have to really focus on her. And it is this sort of ongoing, I think, look back at the last few years and we're just like, man, what the fuck was going on? I heard some people talking about the New York Times or the New York Times Magazine piece, and they were saying, it's actually a hit piece. If you look close enough, like, yes, it's very glowing and this like obvious, it looks like this puppy, but you would have to do that at New York Times Magazine. The quote from like BU saying, there was this brutal quote. What did you have the quote, Sanjana?
Yeah. Boston University provided significant financial and administrative support to Dr. Kendi and the center. Dr. Kendi did not always accept the support. In hindsight, and with fuller knowledge of the organizational problems that arose, the university should have done more to insist on additional oversight. And they then go on to say, several different models were discussed with Dr. Kendi. However, his preference vis-a-vis, whether or not they should have these massive layoffs, and his preference was to terminate the ongoing projects and ask the funders to repurpose the funds for his new endeavor.
Yeah, that to me is, how do we tell the truth? It's very Straussian. The Straussian read of this profile is, we got to distance ourselves from this clown shit. It's bad. Especially, we have enough problems with Biden running as the president. Like, we have to not have any of the clowns from the last election hopping around, distracting us from the mission, which is to keep in there. I think their real mission is to just have political power. I think all of this is about that. But that's that. Moving on from the sad story of the president of DEI, I do want to just have one really quick thing. I want to talk very, very briefly about the spaceship, Elon's spaceship. Brandon, history has been made. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. Thursday, SpaceX launched its fourth Starship, which is a 30-story rocket. And this is like the rocket that they're going to use to take people to Mars, they say. The first three launches were successful by many metrics, but didn't achieve what the fourth did. So today, the rocket was able to launch into orbit, re-enter without blowing up, and it landed. It was able to like flip over and land right side up in the Indian Ocean, basically just demonstrating that this thing is actually going to work, and they're going to be able to reuse the Starship to get us to Mars. So this is like a huge deal this morning. If you watch the videos, they're super inspiring of the actual launch. It's always so like, I actually like start tearing up when I hear the employees of SpaceX like screaming and like yelling in ecstasy every time like a there's a milestone in the launch reached. The launch is about 90 minutes long, and it's just like a really big deal, and they're gonna test again soon, I'm sure. But yeah, it's just like a successful fourth launch, the Starship.
Media reaction.
So the AP, they led the charge today, and their headline was "SpaceX's mega rocket completes test flight without exploding." So my headline would have been like, "We're going to Mars, motherfuckers."
So they're harkening back to, I mean, they really, every time SpaceX launched a test and it blew up, which is expected, it was just like SpaceX explosion, like Elon in tears. This is the end.
Yeah. So the after the first launch, which was successful by Elon's metrics, Wired covered it with the headline, SpaceX's Starship explodes during first orbital test flight. Again, this was actually a really big deal. They had never put the Starship on top of the Super Heavy booster, and they did that, and then they flew it like all in one go. This was like a major success. Elon was like, there's maybe a 50% chance of success, right? So it goes up, Wired shits on it. The second launch, it made it to orbit. Wired again covers it with SpaceX's Starship lost shortly after launch of second test flight. So I mean, this is like par for the course at this point, not to use a cliche, but like anything that Elon does, the mainstream media will attempt to misinform the public about, pretty much. And this is how they're doing it with
it's going to be
SpaceX.
happening on our way to Mars. We're going to be hearing about the failures, and I think if Mars does become a more serious likelihood, what we're really going to start getting are all of the anti-Mars takes. It's going to be anti-Mars political opinion. It's going to be anti-Mars sentiment. We shouldn't be doing this for the following reasons. That very abstract question, I think, is going to become much more motivating, and that is a fight for another day. We have a drop coming 1 week from today, so get ready for it. You're going to have our first piece of Pirate Wire swag. And until then, just have a great week, guys. Have a great weekend first, and then a great week. And come on back. Tell your friends to watch this show. We have to grow this thing. Rate, review. I really mean it. That stuff helps. Like, be liking and commenting. Come on, let's blow this thing up. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.